Hello, everybody. My name is Pablo Boczkowski. I am a faculty member at Northwestern University and the director of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Thank you so much for joining us for today's weekly virtual seminar of the Center. It is really a pleasure to have you with us. The mission of the Center is to create knowledge about digital media in Latinx and Latin American communities across the Americas. Today's speaker is a leading scholar in this space. Lucía Magis-Weinberg is an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Washington, where she directs the interACTlab, the International Adolescent Connection and Technology Laboratory. Valerie Gruest, a doctoral student at Northwestern and an affiliate of the Center for Latinx Digital Media, will introduce Lucía in just a minute. I am delighted to note that this quarter, our series is co-sponsored by the Alice Kaplan Institute for the Humanities, the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, the Center for Global Culture and Communication, the Department of Communication Studies, the Department of Radio, Television, and Film, and the Program in Latin American and Caribbean Studies. But before we go to the seminar, I would like to start by acknowledging that Northwestern is a community of learners situated within a network of historical and contemporary relationships with Native American tribes, communities, parents, students, and alumni. It is also in close proximity to an urban Native American community in Chicago and near several tribes in the Midwest. The Northwestern campus sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. It was also a site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes, and is still home to over 100,000 tribal members in the state of Illinois. It is within Northwestern's responsibility as an academic institution to disseminate knowledge about Native peoples and the institution's history with them. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity and inclusion, Northwestern works toward building relationships with Native American communities through academic pursuits, partnerships, historical recognitions, community service, and enrollment efforts. Let me say briefly a little bit more about how the seminar will unfold. First, Valerie will tell us more about Lucía's research and career in just a minute. Then Lucía will present her work. After that, we will open for questions. Please enter your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar at the bottom of the screen at any point in time. Valerie will moderate. At the end, we will deliver some closing remarks. Once again, many thanks for joining us, and without further ado, Val, the screen is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pablo, thank you so much for having me as a moderator for this seminar. It is an absolute honor for me to introduce our guest speaker for today. Dr. Lucía Magis-Weinberg holds an MD and a specialization in applied statistics from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, an MSc in cognitive neuroscience from the University College London, and a PhD in experimental psychology from the University College London. Professor Magis-Weinberg's work focuses on how the social and affective developmental tasks of adolescents have been transformed by the digital era, particularly in understudied populations in international settings. Her lab collaborates with schools in Latin America to advance knowledge on adolescent development and technology use, and also apply developmental science to design school-based interventions to promote digital citizenship and healthy digital habits. Dr. Magis-Weinberg is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington, where she directs the interACTlab, the International Adolescent Connection and Technology Laboratory. She has received numerous grants and awards, making a very strong contribution to the field. Over the years, she has been active in various outreach and public engagement opportunities. She's also the author of an extensive selection of publications. Her most recent work includes longitudinal change in adolescent depression and anxiety symptoms from before to during the COVID-19 pandemic, social media and adolescent well-being in the Global South, and digital citizenship under lockdown, promoting the healthy use of technology for adolescents growing up in Peru during COVID-19, amongst many others. We are so honored to have Dr. Magis-Weinberg today to share with us her knowledge and experience. So thank you so much. I'm personally very excited for the seminar. And as a reminder to our audience, please submit your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom, which is located at the bottom of your screen at any point during the seminar. We will address these questions in the Q&A portion after the presentation. And with that, Dr. Magis-Weinberg, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Val, and thank you so much, Pablo, for that wonderful introduction, and to Facundo as well for the invitation. to share some of our work with you all. It is definitely one of my favorite audiences and group of scholars really thinking of this Latinx and Latin American space that for me was sort of missing in my career. I didn't find colleagues who were working in this space, so I have been joining these seminars periodically, so it's now a really exciting opportunity to be speaking today. And well, I first want to acknowledge the lab. It's really the work of so many people, as you'll see. Here you see my students, and then also the teachers and school staff with whom we have collaborated over the years. And without these people, it wouldn't be possible. I really want to start by, if you remember one thing from this talk, really remember that adolescence is a wonderful window of opportunity. It's a time of remarkable opportunity and growth. And we now define it from around ages 10 to 25, a period in which we discover, learn from, and adapt to the world around us, where we forge our sense of who we are and who we aspire to be, where we learn to make decisions, manage our emotions, create deeper connections with peers and others in our communities, where we also build resilience, develop interests, passions, and meaningful goals that shape our adult lives. And I do want to highlight all the positives. I want to note that our developing brains that are changing so much in this stage are well suited to these tasks, but too often the systems that serve us are not. So I do like always to start with the positive, because unfortunately, adolescence, as probably you all know, is still notorious for being a time of vulnerability in terms of mental health. Here we see ages 5 to over 50, and then a list of many mental health concerns. And in that orange box, you see that for many mental health concerns, such as anxiety disorders, anorexia, for example, OCD, etc., binge eating, bipolar disorders, panic disorders, etc., especially mood disorders, depression, and anxiety, most of them will manifest for the first time during adolescence. And of course, you have probably all heard that it's really social media, our current favorite scapegoat, that is causing all of these mental health concerns for youth. And that, of course, is not the full story. This is just a scrape from news that I extracted yesterday. And as you can see, we're really putting a lot of the blame on social media for youth mental health. But of course, mental health is a complex result of many vulnerabilities, right? And let's think about the many changes that adolescents are going through. Their bodies are changing drastically. Their brain development is really, really accelerated. There's very important psychological transitions in terms of autonomy and independence, crafting our many identities. We're developing more sophisticated thinking and cognitive capacities. Very important social transitions, right? The transition from elementary to secondary school, which has a lot of challenges. Reorientation from family to peers to really be focused on these aspects of our social world. Important developmental milestones, right? Adolescence is definitely a time of firsts. The first time we develop romantic interest, that we go out on dates, that we drive, that we go to the cinema on our own, like so many firsts that were really thwarted by the pandemic. It's a time where our friendships are transformed profoundly. There's big, important breakups and fights, which are very, very harmful. Graduations, parties, trips. Just think of how many important things happen in adolescence. So it is not surprising that if any of this go wrong or a combination of this goes wrong, our mental health can be challenged. And of course, digital technologies now for the last 20 or so years are interacting with all of these vulnerabilities that I've listed. And they brought a lot of opportunity, but also some risks. So I do want to put social media in the right context. Of course, you all here are the experts on this. The digital world for children, for adolescents, for adults has a lot of opportunities. Cepal talks about this ladder of digital participation, where of course we want young people to have the opportunity to get entertained and be creative. We also want them to get education and information, especially during the pandemic, an important tool for sociability, for communication and connection. But of course, we would like for all young people to reach that level of citizenship, of community, of really changing the worlds around them. Again, many people have said this, opportunities and risks do not materialize out of thin air. There's a lot of things that need to happen, even for these digital natives, for them to really take these opportunities and turn them into benefits, a lot of digital citizenship, a lot of training, a lot of support that needs to happen. And the same for risks, right? There are a lot of risks, I don't deny that. Sonia Livingstone talks about the 4 C's of risk, risks in terms of content, what young people are consuming, whether it is pornography or violent content, or just junk content that doesn't really add much, risks of contact by ill-intended adults, risks to conduct, which can go from digital drama to frank cyberbullying, and of course, the many risks that all of these interactions are happening in these commercial platforms, in these tech giants, right? But of course, the risks also can be prevented from turning into harm. And it's important to think about both sides of the equation. So there's digital gaps during the pandemic, especially in terms of barriers in access, of use and utility, right? We know, especially thinking of a region like Latin America, still cost of these devices, of broadband or electricity are still a barrier. There's still issues of safety, issues of lack of devices. We saw that a lot during the pandemic, where people were sharing the use of devices, which unfortunately led to more monitoring of adolescent girls, staggered connection, right? You do your homework right now, I need to watch my video later. We saw a lot of staggering in the household for use of good quality internet. Of course, the skill gap, the gender gaps that are so prevalent in our region, where in general, women have more limited and more monitored access. And of course, this is even stronger for girls and for adolescent girls. And where in general, there is a predominance of restrictive parental mediation, where parents are so scared about the risks that they tend to restrict access, which in turn is reducing also the opportunities. All of you are the expert here. You know that in our region, the connection is mostly through mobile phones. It's great that people are having more connection, but connecting through mobiles does promote the use of social media versus other types of activities. And in general, we heard so much from previous speakers in the series, mobile phone is still associated with less digital citizenship, less capacity to develop skills and to participate. And in our region, we've also heard from speakers in the past who are conducting the Global Kids Online study. The best or the most nationally representative data we have comes from Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, and Uruguay. And a report that came out before the pandemic showed that in the region, 30% of adolescents have received disturbing content, 25% have received sexual content. Between 13% and 44% are being contacted by strangers. 5 to 10% are experiencing cyberbullying. And of course, all the lack of regulation that we start to see is really happening in the UK, is happening now in California, in the United States. That is still not there in our region. And again, these are data before the pandemic. It won't surprise you that Latin America and the Caribbean was the region overall with the most extensive total or partial school closures. Our region had 60 school weeks of closure versus an average of 41. On the positive side, we did see school closures really spurring implementation, really pushing against the resistance to go digital. We did see a big push towards remote education, remote strategies. However, at the beginning of the pandemic, half of the children and adolescents in our region did not have internet at home. So of course, this is just resulting in critical inequalities and so many unmet needs. And this is just the background in which my project is inserted. This project is called the Transitions Project, alluding to all the many transitions that adolescents go through. And it's a research practitioner collaboration, which involves my lab, a network of schools called Innova Schools, and Common Sense Education. And the big aim of our project was to understand how children and adolescents access, use, and appropriate digital media in Peru and Mexico, and use this information to really design digital citizenship programs that are culturally and developmentally appropriate. I'll just give you some generals of the sample. Innova Schools is a network of low-cost urban private schools that started in Peru and Mexico. They cater to what they call an emerging middle class. They've grown a lot in the region. In Peru, they have over 64 schools, and you can see there in the map, really a lot of national coverage in Peru. They've started to expand. So in Mexico, they had 4 schools at a time. Now they have 6, and they're expanding to Colombia and Ecuador, I think. And it's really a very big system. They have over 30,000 students. We have data on some subsets of those students, and it's been really unique, a really unique research opportunity. I do want to highlight that, of course, it's not nationally representative. These are overall families from low middle income settings that, in contrast with Mexico and with Peru, all the families had connection, all the families had internet, had devices. They were much more digitally connected than an average Peruvian or Mexican student. And for many reasons, we've had a special focus on early adolescence. As I said, it's the most profound time of transition, triggered by puberty. And those changes have always been around. But now those changes are also coinciding with entry into social media and with more autonomous and frequent use of technology. So we really think that early adolescence is a prime time for intervention. And our project, I think, is unique in that we have done these 4 different axes. So one that I'll talk a lot about today is the research that we've done, just collecting a lot of data through self-report, through surveys. I've been really involved in developing this digital citizenship program, and I'll talk briefly about it. We've also have had the opportunity to train teachers, to give them technical assistance, and to do a lot of outreach and direct work with families and students. That has been very important for me to have that dialogue. And this project started before the pandemic, when I was in Berkeley as a postdoc, and it was really focused on digital citizenship curricula. I was flying to Peru. I was working in a small scale with the schools. We were trying to pilot these materials that were developed in the US. But of course, and we had like very careful and considered plans of how the project would grow, and we would continue to test the digital citizenship materials. But of course, the pandemic had different plans, and I was incredibly lucky. One of the silver linings of the pandemic was that the schools, as I said, were fully connected and went to remote education straight away. So we were in a position where we could collect a lot of data on mental health, which is a big concern, school motivation, use of technology to deal with the pandemic, and a lot of digital citizenship. So in Peru, we have more data. We collected data in April 2020, which coincided with almost the start of the school year in Peru, a period of very strict confinement in Peru, then November 2020, June 21, and November 21. And we collected some data in Mexico, and you can see there's sort of their time frame. And as I said, we had access to over 10,000 students. Different studies have subsets of this big sample. It's a community sample where 50% are female, 6th to 11th grade, with a special focus on 6th to 8th grade. And we just sent out all of our surveys through Qualtrics. Of course, I don't have time to go to really characterize both countries' experiences. There were a lot of similarities: prolonged school closures, unfortunately high rates of disease and death due to COVID-19, drastic impacts on families' income, vast inequalities in the ability of some families to work from home, of course, vast rural and urban inequalities. But what we do have in Latin America, right, is very robust family networks, social support, which are so important. Some differences, of course: Peru had a longer period of school closures, and in Peru, the school year runs from March to December, so it coincided with the start of the school year. In Mexico, the school year goes from August to maybe June. Mexico had a shorter period of school closures, but still quite prolonged. Peru did give some stimulus. Mexico didn't give any to vulnerable families. Peru did have much stricter lockdowns compared to Mexico, really, really strict in the first 100 days. And of course, unfortunately, we're still seeing it right now. Peru had several bouts of a lot of political upheaval. In the course of my data collection, 3 presidential changes. And of course, that is impacting on students, although we didn't measure that directly. Okay, just to show you some data, and I'll show you a lot of these graphs, so I did want to orient you to these graphs. In these graphs, we are seeing anxiety first, and on the bottom, you see the 4 dates of data collection, and you see the data split by 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, and then females and males. And you'll see just everyone's data there, and then the trends. And unfortunately, you see, well, first, that there's large individual differences. There's a lot of young people who did fine, a lot of young people who have very high symptoms and are very concerning. But overall, we do see a trend where girls are struggling more, especially in the older grades. If we do by categories, we see a jump from mild symptoms, which unfortunately are very prevalent in adolescents, to moderate symptoms. And we see this trend in everything else that I'll show you. So this is very similar for depression, where we do see, unfortunately, adolescent girls struggling more. Again, in the moderate ranges for depression, concerning, and just, yeah, the rates going up. Life satisfaction, which is the flip side of anxiety and depression, just how happy young people are with their lives. We see first stability for males, but for girls, we see life satisfaction plunging down. And unfortunately, these data are aligning with everything else we're seeing in other samples in other countries, with a lot of impact on adolescent mental health, especially for girls. And of course, if the digital environment was already important for young people, it gained an amplified importance in the context of the pandemic, right? So social media is, of course, a lifeline for young people to maintain social connections during the pandemic. It's interesting that even adolescents themselves perceive a mix, right? So 53% say social media is very important to stay in touch. 43% say they use social media to make them feel better, but 17% say that it makes them feel worse. So again, this message of a very mixed association between social media and mental health. And I know a lot of great colleagues have talked in these seminars about political disinformation, misinformation, all of these issues. But young people and adults as well are also going online to get information about their own health, their physical health, their mental health. And it's really worrying to me that they have the capacity to be able to critically consume information around their mental health, because that's where they're going to be looking for help, right? So in terms of lives online during lockdown, I did want to share some data from Common Sense, who have the best data for young people, because they had data from before. So this is the US, where we are really seeing a drastic increase of 17% between 2019 and 2021 in teens and tweens. We are seeing an increase that was much higher between the 2 last years of the pandemic compared to the 4 years in total. And of course, we saw a big change, right? For better or for worse, young people before the pandemic only really used their devices after school. Really in school, they had a bit more self-regulation, but during the pandemic, they started using their devices like us adults use them, right? Like all day long. And we've heard so much how it's been hard to go back to this pre-pandemic pattern of use. YouTube, I think, is king, and I do want to highlight it's YouTube for adults, not YouTube kids. When this is, again, these adolescents in the US, if they had to pick one site they couldn't live without, it's YouTube. We are seeing similar things in our data, and we are seeing that TV and videos were the bulk of their screen time during the pandemic, even much more than social media. And I do want to put that in context. We're seeing that the percentage of 8 to 18-year-olds who enjoy each activity a lot is mostly for online videos. Video games and social media have a flipped pattern. So we know that video games for young adolescents, especially young adolescent males, is very important for entertainment and for connection. But we also see that social media is growing in tweens as a result of the pandemic. And of course, it makes sense, right? We had to give young people the capacity to be in touch with their friends. So many started using social media earlier. Even in the US, a high-income country, there is gender and SES differences in terms of use. We see that boys are using social media, are using screens more than girls. And we still see drastic income differences in the US, even in a general high-income country, which of course, I don't have clear data on this in our countries, but it's going to be a bit more stark, I would guess. Great, so I'm gonna try to play this video. I don't know if you've heard of the Screenom project. It's a tool that allows researchers to take a screenshot of participants' screens every 3 to 5 seconds. And it really gives us a flavor of what this screen time looks like, right? So this is an undergrad in the US. And this is, look at their screens. So see how fragmented the use is, how much multitasking there is, how they're switching, how they're turning it off, going to Instagram, going to Spotify, trying to do some schoolwork, going back to Instagram. Again, an undergrad in a US college. But really hammering home the point that we need to better capture online lives of youth, because screen time, what the screen time means when young people are doing all this multitasking, right, in a day. Okay, so of course, I've talked about this in the past, and I do want to show you some data that we have on the opportunity side, where young people were using social media for entertainment, for positive interactions, for connection, to get information, and to do pro-social acts. And I will start with some of the data we have on the risks in terms of negative interactions, problematic media use, digital stress, and consuming disturbing information. So these are data from our samples, where very similar to the common sense data, we are seeing that the favorite platforms during lockdown were YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, and video games. We are seeing interesting age differences that I already mentioned, where YouTube predominates and where older adolescents are using social media more. And I do want to, again, highlight that younger adolescent boys, they're not just playing, they're using their game consoles to be in touch with their friends. And it was a very important source of support. I'm becoming very interested in this idea of online-only friendships. Before we used social media to strengthen relationships that we already had. This is changing drastically. We now know in our sample in Mexico and Peru, 50% of the students have friends that they do not know in person, and this increases with age. Men tend to have more friends online than girls that they typically meet in gaming or gaming-related platforms, such as Discord and WhatsApp. And something that's important is that they do report that they feel more closeness and more trust with friends in person, but their friends, their online-only friends, are giving them similar support and shared interests. So something that we need to pay attention a lot, that these online-only friendships are true friendships, even if they never meet in person. So we're now doing work, extending work to Uruguay and Bolivia, trying to understand this phenomenon better with some colleagues, and I'm very excited about that new aspect of our work. Of course, our interactions, who we're interacting with online really matters. So you can see here that overall interactions with strangers tend to be more negative. Interactions with friends and family tend to be more positive, right? So we do really need to be paying attention with whom young people are interacting with online. I want to talk a bit about some studies that we did on the negative effect of technology. I'm very interested in this new concept of digital stress, where of course these new platforms are bringing us 5 different subcomponents of digital stress. The famous one is fear of missing out, that this doesn't need explanation, but there's also connection overload, right? We are receiving information 24/7. Pablo talked so much about this era of abundance of information, right? We now have online vigilance. We're constantly checking our devices, checking our emails, checking our notifications. And 2 things that are very attuned with adolescent experiences are first, disapproval anxiety. What are people going to think of what I post online? How many likes am I gonna get? Are people going to like this photo? And then availability stress. We're hearing from young people that they need to be online, available. If your friend calls at 3 in the morning and you don't pick up, your friend's gonna get angry, right? We're hearing so much of this, just need to be constantly available. And with my student, Daniela Muñoz Lopez, we're starting to look at digital stress in this sample. And we measured this in June 2021, and we saw that the main source of stress for adolescents overall was online vigilance. This digital stress is very associated with anxiety, with depression, and with just offline stress. So we are tapping into these mechanisms of stress and anxiety. And there's interesting patterns in terms of development, right? So here I'm showing you the 5 subscales, and you see there from 6th grade to 11th grade, and we're just seeing how digital stress goes up for everyone. And we see very interesting gender differences in that for girls, approval anxiety is really drastic, the change, and FOMO as well. Again, we did this in half of the sample and replicated our findings in the second half. I'm very interested to continue to explore this issue of digital stress further, because I really think there's a lot that is worrying adolescent girls in particular. And of course, we have heard so much about how everyone is addicted to their devices. It's a word that I don't like to use. Addiction is a very severe mental health concern. We talk about problematic media use, and we define it as use that comes with withdrawal symptoms, with tolerance, with preoccupation, when people are trying to stop using and they are unsuccessful, when they lose interest in their activities, deceiving others, and when they're really losing significant relationships or educational or career opportunities by using their devices. I know that everyone says they're addicted to their devices. We know that in reality, the percentage of young people who actually have this problematic media use is around 7% to 10% in our data. And we were wondering whether this problematic media use grew during the pandemic. So again, showing you very similar graphs where, again, this was surprising in our sample. Typically in the global north, it's really boys who have more problematic media use. In our sample, it was the girls. We were happy at first because when we first measured in May 2020 and compared with data we had before the pandemic, we didn't see an increase and we were sort of relieved. But unfortunately, when we continue to measure, we do see that problematic media use is increasing overall for everyone. But of course, it's increasing more for young people who already had a vulnerability. So again, this complicated relationship between social media, media use, and mental health. It can also be that young people who already have depression, who already have anxiety, are using media in more problematic ways. And social media intensity is a measure of just how important social media is in your life. It's not surprising that social media intensity went up as the pandemic progressed. And interestingly, we looked at social media cross-sectionally and longitudinally, and social media intensity associated with loneliness and with anxiety. And we see 2 different patterns. So we see on the one hand that girls with higher loneliness then tend to use social media more. But if we look at anxiety, and I know I'm showing you a lot of data, it's really social media that is driving the increase of anxiety. So again, the importance of keeping in mind that it's a complex association. If we just look cross-sectionally at our data, we'll see that intensity is associated with higher levels of loneliness and anxiety. But when we start to look at this longitudinally, we see a complex pattern of directionality of associations, where for girls only, it is loneliness driving social media intensity with a different pattern for anxiety. So again, a call for really doing these longitudinal studies that can let us get really unpack the relationship. I do want to briefly talk about the positive effects of technology, which I know I'm preaching to the choir, but there is a lot of positives, of course. We asked young people just open-ended questions about what positives did the pandemic bring you. And I didn't prompt them about technology at all in this question. And the main thing adolescents are highlighting is to value family and every moment. But technology came up a lot in their responses, right? They're saying spending much more time with family, being able to know more about technology. I became the IT specialist in my family. I've learned to use new applications. I got to know more people, spend more time with my family, and learn to use technology devices more. We're seeing technology as a big source of competence, of autonomy during the pandemic. And one thing that I've talked about in the past is how we typically only look at social media and depression, social media and loneliness. And of course, we're going to find this negative association if we only look at one aspect of the equation. But it shouldn't surprise us, right? That an increase in screen time or in our times online is going to increase both the positives and the negatives. We see that this grows with age, where older students are reporting more frequent positive and negative online experiences. But overall, young people are telling us our experiences online are more frequently positive. And of course, well, loneliness follows a very similar pattern where it's going up with during the pandemic. And well, social media was the only thing to deal with this loneliness. Right, so we administered this questionnaire, which was measuring both the positive and the negative at the same time. We were asking, does social media help you feel better when you're upset? It's a big source of advice and counseling. Feel better about my life, feel valued, feel connected when I'm lonely. And that was the predominant reaction. But of course, social media also is associated with rejection, with being treated badly, exclusion, embarrassment, etc. But this shouldn't surprise us because our in-person interactions are very similarly positively and negative, right? And when we look at these positive and negative online experiences with loneliness, we see that they have completely opposite patterns, right? So lower loneliness is related to more frequent positive interactions, whereas lower loneliness is also related to less frequent negative interactions. So again, important to be measuring both sides of our online lives, and we'll find, of course, different associations. There's other studies we've done where we're showing that the online world was a very important source of autonomy and independence, and a very useful vehicle for prosociality. I won't present those data in the interest of time, but I do want to highlight the positive impact during the pandemic, where social networks can be an important platform for social interaction, for entertainment, especially if we adhere to some guidelines of digital citizenship, where we're using social media in balanced ways that are safe, that are intelligent, significant, and really promoting social emotional skills. And online communities are very important to help them to network, especially on sensitive topics, including mental health. We asked young people, what would you recommend other people your age to maintain your friendships during distance education? A lot of them are talking about the importance of technology to make new bonds, to meet new people, to make calls or video calls. And I do really want to highlight this response by a student who says, you need to use social media in an appropriate way. How long are we using social media, social networks? To using these means give us happiness, right? So again, these ideas of a meaningful, of a better way to use social media, creating links through virtual classes. And I really like that they're answering that, because that connects with the big component of digital citizenship that we have been working with schools. And I'll just briefly talk about this intervention that we did, where we define digital citizenship as the skills, support, and resources necessary for responsible, meaningful, and intelligent use of digital media to learn, to communicate, to create, and to participate. I draw the analogy of a bicycle, which can be unsafe, but of course, we're not going to restrict access to this bicycle, right? We need to foster skills and knowledge of social media, of digital media platforms. We need to do scaffolding. We need to do support as adults in young people's lives. Of course, we need to push for better systems and better structures and better regulation. But I do think that schools can be very powerful platforms to promote digital citizenship and healthy digital habits. Especially, as I said, early adolescence is a critical window of opportunity when young people are starting to get their devices, are starting to open their social media accounts. But also early adolescence compared to later adolescence is a period of much more openness to parental and teacher mediation and guidance. So we think it's a key moment to intervene. And that's a happy picture from my last trip to Peru in 2019. And I really hope I can go back again soon. So very briefly, this program was developed by Common Sense Media in the United States. We work with them. It's a short course. It's meant to be delivered by teachers over 6 to 9 sessions. As you see in the materials, there's teacher instruction in the classroom, there's videos, there's student workouts, home activities, a lot of scaffolded reflections, a lot of helping young people work through digital dilemmas. These are wonderful materials. A lot of schools in the US use them in English. We work with them to do translations, to do cultural adaptations. And we talk about 6 main themes: balancing the media and well-being, privacy and security, our digital footprints, relationships and communication, digital drama, cyberbullying and hate speech, and news and media education. And this was the main focus of the project before the pandemic started. We did manage to do an intervention design. It was really a pilot where we compared controlled classrooms and treatment classrooms who received the materials over the course of 2 weeks. And this was really a pilot, which wasn't really meant to be the final test of effectiveness, but the pandemic really disrupted our capacity to continue to test this in a more proper way. So we analyzed the data anyways, and they're not super strong results, but we are finding that in this pilot, our digital citizenship can you see there, the results aren't very strong, but we are seeing that our materials can foster positive online interactions, while they can prevent an increase in negative online interactions. Again, it was a pilot. We learned so many things that we need to change and improve on, and I'm hoping that we can do that again in Mexico very soon. We do have some promising evidence that just these 2 weeks of these courses are generating some awareness, young people talking about emotions, the impact of media on sleep, privacy, digital footprint. I love some of the quotes from students. A lot of their learnings were mostly on privacy and security, how to use passwords to be safe, how to change our profiles settings to be safer. With one like, we're giving all of our information to companies, talking about cookies. 12% of the students in the reflections did talk about the impacts of technology on the relationship and communication, and how you should be careful with what you post, considering other people's lives. And we did see some answers about balance and well-being. So, of course, this is not the perfect test for our intervention, and I want to continue to work on testing the intervention. And one thing that I'm super excited about as a next stage for the intervention is the addition of social media test drive. This is a wonderful educational app developed by the Social Media Lab in Cornell and Lehigh Universities. If you can see it there, and you can go to the website in English, it's completely free, completely accessible. It's a simulated sort of Instagram, Facebook that combines social media and educational components. It's a safe environment where young adolescents get hands-on experience, get guided reflections on the risks and benefits of social media. It's especially targeted for young people before they open their accounts as sort of an onboarding to social media. And it's like a driver simulation, right? We have that before we go and take our tests to drive. It makes a lot of sense that we have something similar for social media, which allows young people to navigate the opportunities and vulnerabilities of the digital highways. So again, very excited about this next step, doing a lot of translation, a lot of cultural adaptation of the tool, and hoping to add this to the classroom materials. With that, I know I've given you lots of data, and I'm wrapping up. Unfortunately, we are seeing data that well-being and mental health deteriorated during the pandemic, especially for female adolescents. This will have mid to long-term consequences that we need to be very aware of. Again, social media does play a role, but it's just one of the many contributing factors. I've shown you data of how social media can help counter the effects of the pandemic. Increased screen time is associated with both positives and negatives. I talked about the positives. I've shown you how social media has been fundamental for social connection, for giving and receiving help online, for how positive online experiences are a vital source of social support and help counteract feelings of loneliness. Of course, there's negatives. We did see that people who have more negative experiences feel more lonely. We also see that it contributes to digital stress. And we know that problematic media use is on the rise. But again, this message of balance, right? Of positives and negatives, and social media not being the full story. And in terms of practice, well, we have a compelling need to better equip young adolescents to successfully navigate the risks and opportunities of the digital world. This challenge is really compounded by the rapid pace of change, variability in global context, how little data we have in this global context. Again, I hope I've convinced you that early adolescence, a period of transition, of pubertal changes, of entry into social media and autonomous use of technology, is really the time to act and to intervene to set young people in better trajectories. And really, my experience working with schools has convinced me that it's one very powerful platform to really be working with people who really know the needs of young adolescents in their classrooms and who are really trying to do the best for them. So with that, I want to thank all of you. Muchísimas gracias. I want to thank my team and you for your attention.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful and truly insightful presentation, Professor Magis-Weinberg. Before we get started with our Q&A, I would like to remind our audience to submit your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will address them as soon as they come in. I have so many questions. This is absolutely fantastic. I think your work is fascinating and so timely. But I'll get our conversation started with one question. You mentioned how most mental health issues and disorders really manifest for the first time during adolescence. And I'm really intrigued by your results on changes over time in adolescents' well-being and the dimensions of anxiety, depression, life satisfaction. And in my case, I know with eating disorders, the typical case of co-occurring disorders is first manifesting anorexia symptoms in early adolescence and then transitioning into more bulimic symptoms in late adolescence, early adulthood. So with what you mentioned in your presentation, with symptom severity and incidence rates really increasing over time during the pandemic, I'm really curious as to how you see this affecting incidence and manifestation of co-occurring disorders over time. And is the typical timeframe that we have for disorders and co-disorder development really heading towards earlier symptomatology and more acute conditions more generally?
Thank you for that wonderful question. Yeah, adolescence at this period of many transitions, again, it's not surprising that we're seeing the manifestation of many mental health concerns at the same time. You pointed out a great point that many of these disorders co-occur. Anxiety and depression very commonly appear together with eating disorders as well. So that's something that it's important to keep in mind because as I showed for problematic media use, that's another co-occurring mental health concern, right? So when we're thinking about what is causing what, whether it's social media driving the increases in mental health concerns, that could be part of the answer. But of course, people who already have more vulnerabilities will interact with people differently, will use social media in more harmful ways. You probably have seen this a lot. We know for people with body image concerns, they have different accounts. They have an account where they know they go and they're triggered and they sometimes want to see that information. They sometimes go with communities where this is promoted, right? A very complicated landscape there. We have seen mental health. We talk so much about a mental health crisis in adolescence that we have seen really on the rise since the 1980s. Of course, the pandemic has compounded a lot of these factors, and we are seeing more increases now as a result of the pandemic. A lot of people have raised the question whether the appearance of social media also contributes But again, I want to put social media in the context of everything else that young people are dealing with. Yeah, so I do think that paying attention, as you mentioned, to these periods of transition where so many things are changing, so many things are happening, is very important when we're looking at many of the symptoms. And there's other things that we know are frankly accelerating. We know the age at which young people are starting puberty has decreased drastically over the course of the 20th century. And I think that the acceleration of puberty is of concern and can contribute to seeing many of these disorders earlier.
No, thank you. That's such wonderful insight, and call for future research at that point. And if you wouldn't mind, could you stop sharing your screen? Actually,
yes.
One of our team members has a question for you. Mora?
Oh, for some reason, I can't activate my camera. If Pablo could allow me to do that. If not, I can also speak. Hi, Lucia. It's great to see you. And your presentation was so amazing. You have so much data. Everything that you shared, it's like opens a world in itself for future research. And I actually have a question.
Mora, sorry to interrupt. You should be able to use your camera now.
Oh, hi. Hi, Lucia. Thank you, Pablo.
Hi,
I have a question about what you said on online stress and online vigilance and how you're trying to find that, to continue that in the future. And I wonder whether you have any insights on voluntary digital disconnection and the association with digital stress, or not the association, but as a response to digital stress. I do know, because of the thing that I'm doing for my dissertation, that it's an issue for some adults, not all of them, but some adults. So it's an issue in the adult world. So I wonder, what can you tell us about the teenager world and voluntary digital disconnection, and whether you see that as a sort of solution, quote unquote, on digital stress? I want to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mora. And ever since I heard your presentation on digital disconnection, that's been very much in my thoughts. It's interesting how much young people have absorbed this very negative discourse we have on social media. So when you talk to adolescents, they experience so much guilt, so much shame. They really think that they should be self-regulating more. So I think, especially with adolescents in Seattle, I do hear that story of digital disconnection, which isn't surprising. I think it's very prevalent in the Bay Area, in the Seattle area, in the US. So they're absorbing that, and they're really trying to delete their accounts, turn off their accounts. And I think especially higher income youth who have access to other sources of entertainment, right? Or other sources of connection with their friends. In Seattle, yes, young people can meet with their friends safely in wonderful parks, in wonderful after-school activities. Can young people in a metropolitan Lima or metropolitan Ciudad de Mexico do that? I'm not that sure. So I think that's very important when you think about disconnection as an adult, where you have other ways to navigate the world, where young people might not have it. But broadly, I do see young people starting to consume all those messages and really feeling very guilty when they fail to regulate. And again, it's very unfair, right? We have the best digital companies in the world who are hiring very smart people, very smart product designers and product managers who really want to consume our attention and our time on screens. And asking adults, but then asking young people who are still developing, whose brains are still developing to be successful regulators. I think it's hard. It's unfair.
Thank you both.
And sorry, Mara, a tiny thing. Not digital disconnection per se, but young people, part of the things they missed from going to school was just going to an environment where your teachers restrict you from using your phones, right? And they always want their parents to have more rules. They want their parents to hide their phones as part of the ways to deal with it.
Thank you so much, Mora. We also have a question from Facundo.
Yeah, sorry, Pablo, could you also allow me to unmute my camera? Thank you. I don't know what happened today, but I can start with it. Now I am. All right. Thank you, Lucia. This was wonderful. A lot food for thought for continue thinking about those issues. I'm curious about I will cite Pablo's and Mora's forthcoming book on To Know Is to Compare. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about what did you learn by comparing like different cases, but also like different contexts, but also at different moment of time that you could have learned otherwise, especially about the thing you mentioned about the gender gap, which is something that is consistent across contexts and across time and populations. And so how from what you learn from that, how do you adapt and think about the intervention on the digital citizenship based on the knowledge you obtain on the research? So thank you.
Thank you so much, Facundo. So I still have not done a lot of direct comparison between Peru and Mexico, especially because of our sample size. Our population in Peru is much bigger than the one in Mexico. But that is something that I want to start to do, comparing these two contexts in which there were a lot of similarities. And it's also interesting that they're the same types of schools, the same brand, who cater for the same families. So that gives us some homogeneity across two countries that have a lot of differences, but also a lot of similarities. One interesting thing is how we talk about, I think, for example, in Peru, a lot of Peruvian youth are consuming information processed by Mexican YouTubers, Mexican influencers who are taking some aspects of US culture, US products, and then in Peru, they receive them from the US, but also through Mexican influencers, YouTubers who are very, very popular in the region. We see young people having so much fun with copying different accents in the region. I don't know if you know 11, 12-year-olds, they're all great at imitating all the different accents in Spanish. They really love to do that. What is unfortunate, a very strong similarity across context is just how much of a gender gap exists, how much girls were asked to do much more during the pandemic, right? Much more household work, much more caring of siblings, more of these typical female gender roles. And we know that that contributes to the stress that young girls are carrying. I always struggle to talk about the gender differences we see in mental health because they are there, but I don't want us to forget all the structural challenges and all the structural barriers that young women face. So there might be some biological vulnerability to some of these concerns, but there's definitely a lot of structural challenges, a lot of different ways in which we socialize girls and boys to talk about their friendships, to talk about their emotions. So a lot there to explore.
Thank you so much, Facundo. I have another question for you. I really like your approach to emphasizing really the positive effects of technology on mental health. I think there's such a strong negative bias in the literature with this association. So that was really refreshing to see your take on it. And I'm really wondering, where do we draw the line between the positive and negative effects of technology on well-being? As you showed, like screen time varies so much and there still needs to be worked on like how this is measured, but we can really go from watching a YouTube video about statistics, how do we do statistics, to, you know, consuming really harmful like self-harm content on Instagram. So how can we manage the true impact of technologies when we face this constantly changing digital landscape?
Yeah, and I like the framework that's been proposed by some of my colleagues. I'm thinking of Jessica's Hamilton approach, where she thinks that we really need to move away from talking about how much. We need to be thinking about what are young people doing online. We need to better measure that. It's hard. It's very hard to do. What are young people doing it? When are they doing it, right? We have a lot of concern of young people staying up all night, playing video games, chatting. We know that's true. So when really matters. And especially who. As I showed, some people have underlying vulnerabilities. So for some people, things are going to be more harmful. And we really need to understand this landscape much better. And moving away from screen time, moving away from these averages to really understand individual patterns in resilience and in risk, I think is the way forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for this excellent seminar. Thanks for all the great questions, and thank you for a wonderful audience who's staying with us through the end. I want to wish everybody a great rest of your weeks and invite you to join us next Thursday for the next iteration of this virtual seminar series. Once again, Lucia, this was fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. This was lovely.
Bye now.